Welcome back, everybody. It's been a while, but I am back in Germany, and I'm sort of on the edge of survival and all these wonderful things. So, what are we going to do today? Well, first of all, welcome to all of you new subscribers after the conversation I had with Philip Chase, Dear Dr. Fantasy. A lot of you came over here, and I just want to say welcome, y'all. I'm glad you made it here. I hope you'll stay, and if you like it, you maybe even join in the conversation and, share all kinds of, comments, wisdom, and whatnot, like videos, do all those wonderful things. On the other hand, thank you to all of those of you who have been here for a while, because we're going to do something fun today. And this is going to be me talking more about the Wheel of Time in a more generic way. And while we're doing this, I want to cheer and thank my newest patron backer. Zan, this one's for you. Well, cheers. Well, if you feel like making me cheer you or drink even a beer that you specifically want me to drink, there's a Patreon, but you don't have to go there. I would, however, obviously very much appreciate it. And now let's do the thing that I want to do. Now, after me suffering through the entirety of the Wheel of Time, I wanted to do a bunch of more general videos on what I really didn't like about it, and what I absolutely hated about it, and, what I liked about it, because there's a few things that weren't bad or anything. And this is going to be what I'll do in the next couple of days. I thought first about doing one monstrously long video, and then I figured, no, let's do a couple shorter ones, thematically sorted and stuff. And for those of you who have actually sat through all of my terrible videos, this will be sort of a bit of a repetition, I guess, in some regards, but I'll try to do it differently. And those of you who have not watched those videos, you don't have to. They show me slightly agitated in a lot of ways, and this is going to be a more sober, well, not sober, but a more less emotional discussion, I hope. What am I talking about? Through my read-through, I found a lot of things that really annoyed me in a lot of ways with the Wheel of Time, and I figured I'll just group them by theme, and I'll talk about it, and see if there's, parallels to other fantasy books, stuff that we can learn from it, that we should, maybe look out for when we read other fantasy books. So this was not an entire waste of time and money, but actually, brings us something, a bit learning experience and shit like that. Wouldn't that be great? So I'll try to structure this a bit more, and I'll try to keep it calm and don't yell at you all like I used to in those videos, and we'll see how all of that works. If you're wondering why my voice is broken, yeah, I was at the Courts of Chaos Festival and caught a bit of a cold, because drinking all day in the sunshine and then sleeping at 5 degrees in a tent and maybe forgetting to actually close your sleeping bag does wonders for your immune system, I can tell you that. So I'm on the mend, however, and we're going to tackle this now. So let's start with the world building, especially the cultures, and why it sucks. And let's start this generically. I'm going to look at how a lot of fantasy does world building, and does, describe cultures and countries and whatnot. Then I'll talk about why it is slightly different with the Wheel of Time. Then I'll talk about where the historical background for that is, and then I come to the final point on why it is really bad with the Wheel of Time, especially, and why we should maybe not go there anymore when we write or read fantasy, and maybe call it out when we find it. So, what do I mean? Well, when we read fantasy, and when authors write fantasy, or when we, as, dungeon masters, create fantasy worlds to play in, we have to tackle the questions how do we define cultures, how do we portray them, and make them understandable for the reader, make them interesting, but also make them, recognizable, so it's easy for a reader or player to come and say, yeah, I get it, I have an image in my head, how do I do this? And that's, that's the challenge that all of, people of writing in fictional worlds that are not directly based on our world have to tackle, and thus also Robert Jordan when he created the Wheel of Time. Now, the most popular and easiest approach, and probably also maybe even the best approach, is the approach of like the fastest certainly, is the approach to go and look at our world, look at cultures that we have in our world, and take bits and pieces and mix and match them, and change them a bit around so people can say, yeah, but the Rohirrim in Lord of the Rings are basically Vikings, but they don't have ships, they ride horses. Now, there's a lot more to it, but that's something where you can they're all like huge blonde warriors riding horses instead of like dragon boats, which, cool, you got it. It's simple, and you have like a direct image on how to do this. Or you go and do the, what are they called? The Scythy, I don't know how to pronounce them, in, say, Tad Williams' Memoir of Sorrow and Thorn series, where you're like, so, they are basically elves, but they're also slightly Japanese. And suddenly you have a pretty good idea of what this will be like, or an image in your head. And in general, there's nothing wrong with that. That's how we've all done it when we came up with our first own fantasy worlds. We're like, yeah, this is basically like this is basically like this, and you just like change a bit around, give some of the people like pointy ears or whatever, and you have your world, and it's easy to go in there because it's recognizable. And as I said, this is generally fine. The next big thing you can do is go and add visuals. Visuals in writing, I mean. Sounds stupid, but let me tell you. So basically what you do is you go like, you know what? I'll just make like a few like very distinct things on how people dress there, what kind of, hair, styles they wear, how they build their buildings, how architectural looks. I'll just come up with some cool things, and that's where you can go wild and come up with stuff that doesn't have to be inspired by our real world or real world cultures, and you just add bits like that. One of them is, for example, for the hobbits in Lord of the Rings, to go back to that one, is like, yeah, they're basically British farmers, but they'll live in holes in the ground instead of like having farmhouses, basically. And suddenly you have a unique feature that makes them stand out and be different. And that's, once again, that's perfectly fine to do. And that's, once again, easy. And Wheel of Time does that as well, to a level where you have people making fun of how many times Robert Jordan talks about like hairs, like especially clothing styles and how the color combinations and whatnot. He spends an inordinate amount of time on that, and once again, that's fine. But just color schemes and clothing styles don't make a culture, at least not in like a world building sense. Yeah, black T-shirts with like unreadable logos on it make heavy metal culture. I'm well aware of that, but trust me, there's more to it even there. My point is, those are shorthand ways to describe culture to a reader who doesn't want to go back and read like the entire history of a country, the entire anthropology, all these things. It's fine, and the Wheel of Time does that to a pretty large extent. However, the Wheel of Time does something more than that. Yes, we learn that people in Ibudar go and, like, women have, like, one side of their skirts pinned up so you can see the colorful petticoats beyond it, below it, and you have the idea of, like, the stripes giving you what kind of rank you have, even in society in Kyrian, and you have, like, all these ideas in there. And all of those are, like, really harmless, nice things. The problem is that if you think that just the hair or clothing style make a culture, or make a culture unique or interesting, you're losing sight of a very specific other thing. That other thing is cultures, have all kinds of cultural practices, religious rites, social rites, the kind of local holidays, all of that stuff that you have that make up your, like, culture's a dumb word here, but you know what I mean. Like the things you do, like the holidays you celebrate, the way you celebrate holidays, all of those cultural practices make up a specific culture, the culture of a specific group of people, and that once again is absolutely fine if there's more to it if you're going to go it as an academic, but we're not going to do that here. We're going to stay with the consumer-friendly pop culture version, I guess. And Wheel of Time starts out with that and does it once or twice throughout the books. That is, we have the Beltane festival at the beginning of Eye of the World, where, we're like basically assuming it's, Beltane, but also like a general like spring festival kind of thing. The word Beltane lets us think on like pseudo-Celtic and whatnot, and that works, wonderful. And then later on we have like a bunch of festivals described in Ebu Dar and Kyrian, and the fact that all of those are very much about like who gets to fuck whom and who gets to wear as little clothes as possible, so our upright Andorrans can be scandalized, is a different matter that we might talk about in a different video. But at least we have like this idea, yes, there is this kind of thing. In theory, the idea that people in Ebu Dar go and duel a lot might also be seen as a cultural practice. However, it leads me to the problem that we have with the Wheel of Time, and that's national characters. All right, so where are the problems with that? The first problem is the national aspect. Now, cultures, or like the term culture, in a lot of ways is basically a means for us as fairly limited-brained kind of people to group all of humanity in distinct, units where like these people over there are like this and these people over there are like that, and that helps us deal with the world, which is chaotic, hard to organize, hard to understand, and in general a mess. So that's where the idea comes from. We can assume that there are certain cultural practices that say people in the global Northwest, which is most parts, parts of Western Europe, parts of Central Europe, parts of North America, Canada, all of these people, we share certain cultural practices, and you can come up with like all kinds of other groups like that. Now, the first thing that Wheel of Time does, however, is that it equals culture very much with nation. And that's that's a problem to start with. Because the nation state is a theoretical construct that it got really popular in the 19th century. And, well, I personally believe that the nation state is the wrong way to go about organizing humanity, but let's not have that discussion today. We can still talk about like how they suck in like a different video if you really want to talk about more political stuff. My point is, nation states are a theoretical construct. They are not a natural way for humanity to group itself into, distinct units, so to speak. They were invented and created and forced upon people over a long time, depending on where you live, especially in Europe, I guess. The 19th century is the big time for that. You have some way, that stuff starts earlier with, like, say, France, that had, like, it's sort of like creation as a nation state over most of the medieval period, when you have, your Paris basically taking over the rest of the country until they, extinguish the Occitan language. They're still about trying to extinguish the Breton language, I guess, stuff like that. But it's an ongoing process, and you define a nation, and that's already a bit of a problem, because with nation comes nationalism. And your next thing is, we have this theoretical unit where, like, everyone who lives within these geographical borders has to be like this. And there's like an inside perspective, which is, you force everyone to speak the same language, all of these wonderful things. But you also need to create, in that situation, a distinction from the people on the other side of that, to quote Terry Pratchett, dotted line. And you need to make sure that they are different than people on this side of the dotted line, which obviously makes no sense, because, they're like 10 minutes by foot from your village, they'll probably be very much the same kind of people, but now they're no longer. And that's something where in especially the 19th century you try and establish, like it starts early on with the 17th 18th century, you try to establish the idea of like there are such things as national characters. They go beyond cultural practices, clothing styles and so forth, into like aspects of character, behavioral patterns, moral patterns and stuff like that. You know, you say like everyone in this country, they're all liars. They are all like fond of intrigue. They will backstab you all the time. They cannot be trusted in this country. Whereas everyone in this country here is always on time, has no sense of humor, and seems to be really good with mechanics. It's not true. And there's like a reason historically where that comes from, which is the rise of the natural sciences in the 17th and 18th century, which with its practices that come with it through the Enlightenment is then used for everything. It's like we can categorize everything. We can put everything in categories, and that will help us sort out the world. So we try to actually create these categories for nations as well. Like people who live there will be like this, this, and this, and this. And we apply this not only to, you know, actually existing things like, you know, well, not even physical appearance really, but, you know, but we also applied to moral characters and all of these wonderful things. And that is a huge fucking problem. It is a huge fucking problem in our world, but it you know, and it's exactly what Robert Jordan does in his world. To wit, everyone in Andor is, you know, honest, freedom-loving, does not want their government to take too strong a hand in their lives, and so forth. That slightly has fairly strict morals where sexuality and so forth is concerned. That's how people in Andor are. People in Kyrian, for example, are very much into intrigue. That's their bread and butter. That's all they do every time. You can't trust a Kyrian person when they talk to you because they have like 3 meanings at least in every word and read everything in there because that's how they are. That's just their national character. Whereas everyone in Abu Dar is always on the brink of homicide by a duel. They are just clerics, all of them. Whatever you do will be seen as an insult and will be answered by a duel immediately. That's how that city is described. And then we come to the really bad one, which is in Aradoman, the Domani women will use their physical appearance and their skills at seduction at every opportunity to make every man do what they want for business. There's never anything else. It's all business with them. But they are the best at seducing men. And no, but you see where I'm going with it. It's the way Wheel of Time defines cultures is as people living in a specific nation with fixed borders. Everyone in there seems to be fairly uniform in the way they behave, and then apart from just ascribing, you know, hairstyles, clothing styles, and the like, it also ascribes them national characters, national characteristics, and this is where Wheel of Time goes like too far and in the wrong direction. Now, is it the only fantasy work that does that? Of course not. There's more of them. Like, it goes all the way back to Tolkien in a way when he talks about like how the people, you know, are all noble and whatnot in Gondor or Anor and what, you know. It's always been there. The problem is we should know better by now. We should know that national characters are not a thing. They don't exist. And don't come in with the whole like, yeah, but stereotypes have a basis. Yeah, the basis was your people trying to define your government wanted you to think that you are better than the guys on the other side of that dotted line. That's all it is. That's nothing more. Stereotypes don't have a basis in reality. They have a basis because we've been taught them forever and ever and ever. And they were created quite often, quite, you know, deliberately. So, yeah, fuck off with that. Let's continue. So the Wheel of Time goes into that. It takes a lot of, you know, it defines cultures as nation states with very distinct looks, styles, building styles and whatnot, which is fine. Well, the distinct, you know, clothing styles stuff is fine, the nation states are not fine. Because it's kind of ridiculous to think that, like, as soon as you cross the river, everyone else looks differently. It even goes into biology where it's like, yeah, everyone in Chiron is small, and everyone in Andor is tall and more blonde, and it's like, and they border each other. I don't know about you, but it's like you walk about, like, say in Europe, it's like you don't cross like over to France and suddenly everyone is small and dark skinned and swarthy or whatever. It doesn't work like that. It never did. But the way it is presented in that world is obviously kind of, you have to actually shorten these things because, you're writing a book and not like describing the actual world. I get it, but it feels kind of ridiculous. Where it becomes dangerous is the idea when you actually add like moral characteristics and stuff like that, as with, the Kyrians, the Andorans, and what I just like pointed out. And that is basically straight up from like the beginning of like nation states and nationalism from the 19th century, where we did the exact same thing. And it sucks. It led us into all kinds of wars, some of which my country started but never really won. But just to say, but, it doesn't work like that. And we don't, we shouldn't go that direction. Now let's look at like one further issue here, and that is the lack of history. The Wheel of Time doesn't have history. The Wheel of Time presents us all of these cultures as monolithic. They have been that way forever. Well, since the breaking of the world, basically, or whenever the nations were established. But that's it. The issue is that a lot of these, like, if you want to call them stereotypes, and if you want to talk about like how some of them have a basis somewhere, they have evolved for all kinds of historical reasons. It's like you think people in a specific country are supposed to be like super tight with money and all of them are misers. It might just be that in that area poverty was like a much bigger thing, so that people there were not as free with their cash or whatever. That's where these kind of things are hugely from. And we don't have that with Wheel of Time. We just get like thrown in, like, yeah, everyone here is like that. Everyone here is like that. It's God-given. Well, we don't have a God in that world. Not really, but we do and whatever. But we're not talking about like metaphysics today. So let's not look at that. The point is, it is given without any like evolution or like why people in a specific area might behave in a specific way. It's just in their blood. It's even literally there. It's like you can't take the game of houses out of Kyrian. Out of a Kyrian. It's like, the fuck? That's like really bad. And we do have that in there. So like it seems to be really like tight-knit to their like birth in a specific country, that it's biologically so that everyone in that area will be like that. And that leads to a very bad consequence that I just think is where it gets really bad. And that is superiority. White supremacy, almost. Let's not call it that way because, but here's the thing. As soon as you go and ascribe specific moral characters to members of a specific nation, and since we live in like a moral world, or a world in which we all have ideas of morality and proper behavior and so forth, when we attach specific national characters in that regard, it is so easy to then actually create a hierarchy. When it's like, yeah, you know what? The Andorans, to go where we're going with this, are, freedom-loving, honest workers, hardworking. They don't like anyone to tell them what to do, and so forth. They're like straight up the ideal of your almost libertarian white American, basically. Whereas those people, you can't trust them. They're backstabbers. Those people are completely chaotic. They're incapable of ruling themselves. They need an external force to rule them, because otherwise they'll just be dueling on the street all the time. Not even their kings have any power over them. And so if you go about that and you suddenly create this hierarchy where you create a cultural supremacy, one that is objectively, or almost objectively, good, or like right, because it's fairly clear that like being honest is better than being, deceitful and so forth. You have And that's what the Wheel of Time implicitly does with its world. You can create a pyramid of like which nation is better than another just by their national characteristics, and that's straight up 19th century nationalism. Nationalism. That's the word I was looking for, and that's a huge fucking problem. And now let's bring it all the way back why I think it is not just like, bad world building, but actually kind of harmful. And that's right from the beginning. Remember when I told you that, it's easy to take a culture in your fantasy world and create them as a mix-up or a parallel to one in our world? Right. It's what Robert Jordan does. And Andor is very much like, a Western Europe, almost, Anglo-Saxon Europe in a lot of ways, the way it is described, and the way, the cultural, the national character that is ascribed to it, the way people, in the Two Rivers, there's a lot of like Welsh longbow shootery and stuff like that in there. We have all of that, and then you attach to them that objectively best moral character as well. It's very easy for readers to identify with that and say, yeah, we're the best because we're like that anyway, and so forth. And that is where suddenly the Andoran supremacy in the Wheel of Time is so close to becoming the other thing. And yes, I am aware that this is a fantasy book. But fantasy books are more than just something I read, close, and that they leave like no impression on my worldview. That's not how reading works, no matter what work you're reading, whether it's fantasy, science fiction, or anything else. That's not how it works. And reading something like The Wheel of Time and having these elements in there is perpetuating stereotypes from the 19th century that are harmful, and is perpetuating them in a way that can really, have some consequences. Apart from it, it's just like really lazy and shitty world building. So yeah, that's my short version on why so much of the Wheel of Time's world building sucks, is we have no history behind it. We just like ascribe moral character to people living within the borders of a specific country. We then rank them, basically implicitly rank them by those moral qualities. And because those cultures are still very much parallels of cultures in our world, we reflect our own worldview in there, or Robert Jordan's worldview in there, or you can use it to reinforce stereotypes in our world. And reinforcing stereotypes is never good. With that, thanks for watching. I would love to hear your comments on this, your thoughts on this, and I'll promise to actually answer comments now that I'm back home and have time for this kind of stuff. And I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.